You mentioned the spinners there a minute ago, mate. I think that the Bulls were reaching out to Mark Knopfler for a short-term sponsorship because they were in dire straits at this stage.
Yeah, they were definitely not brothers in arms at this point of the season.
Oh, my goodness.
I always like to say that Michael got to play with me for a year at North Carolina. I think it really helped him.
Spectacular player from the beginning.
You can see right away Jordan was going to be a big-time scorer.
And showed what an impact he was going to have on the league.
This is NB86, celebrating the 30-year anniversary of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls' 1986 NBA season. And now your hosts, Adam Ryan and Aaron Steen.
Welcome to episode 10 of NB86. How are you today, Aaron? Thanks again for being a part of the show, mate.
Imagine, if you will, a 30-episode recap of the rookie season of the greatest player of all time in Michael Jordan. 1984-85 Bulls, game by game, 30 episodes. Check it out, NB85.
Your shameless self-promotion is excellent. I appreciate it. inallanis.com/NB85 to get to our series page. If you're new to the show, thanks for joining us. If you're a regular listener, welcome back.
NBA News, Notes and Quotes. February 7th through 21st, 1986.
On the 9th of February, mate, the 1986 NBA All-Star Game took place at Dallas's Reunion Arena. The East were winners 139-132. Isaiah Lord Thomas III won MVP honours with a 30-point, 10-assist, 5-steal effort. Michael Jordan and rookie Patrick Ewing did not play due to injury, and no replacement players were named in their absence. Now, you can listen to episode 70 of the podcast to hear Orlando Blackman discuss his All-Star memories, including this said contest. We'll be releasing a standalone episode of the In All Annals podcast, which you may or may not know anything about yet, Aaron, that will cover the 86 All-Star Game at a future date.
Appreciate the heads up.
You're welcome.
Instead of having a beautiful woman on his arm at All-Star Weekend, Michael Jordan had Bulls rookie Charles Oakley beside him. Now, not at all on his arm either, by the way, and hello to podcast favourite Charles Oakley if you're listening. I just wanted to smooth it over if you thought that maybe him and MJ were arm in arm at the All-Star Weekend. The previous week at the Deerfield Multiplex, where last year I was able to get a few shots up, 1980s practice facility of the Chicago Bulls.
Fantastic.
Jordan could be seen playfully getting stuck into his teammates from the sidelines, still hopeful of a return to the court straight after the All-Star break.
Now, mate, there were a lot of great tidbits relating to the NBA that surfaced around this All-Star break, and Bob Sakamoto of the Chicago Tribune reported that Dr. J mentioned that 1987 would be his farewell season, and for once, this actually proved to be true. Usually a player would extend their stay at the highest level beyond the initial reports. Case in point, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who we talked about during the NB85 series. He was allegedly retiring after the 85 or then 86 season before he ultimately played through to 1989.
I think it was actually the 1985 and the 1986 season, then also the 1987, the 1988. Eventually, he actually retired in 1989.
Now, here's a great morsel. I don't think I've used that in this series yet. A morsel for you to ponder. David Stern discussed a possible best-of-7 series to be played in Italy featuring the runners-up of the Eastern and Western Conferences. That's incredible when you think about that.
Yeah, and I mentioned to you that David Stern was always one that was very keen to, if this is a word, internationalize the game.
Well, you've just created one, let's be honest. You've added about 4 more consonants than needed, but anyhow, go with it.
Yeah, he loved it, getting the NBA overseas and expanding the exposure of the game, and I don't think that there's any commissioner, not that I really know the background of any other commissioners in any of the 4 major sports in America, but he was certainly very good at spreading the international fame of the NBA.
Yep, and a great book to reference would be Jack McCallum's Dream Team, where he also talks about how the NBA expanded their horizons and discusses the inspector of meat, I'm pretty sure you refer to him as, Boris Stankovic. I'm not too sure how you pronounce his surname. A fantastic book there from the great Jack McCallum. On the 11th of February, Turner Broadcasting System, better known as TBS, signed a 2-year extension with the NBA to give the company exclusive national cable coverage through the 87-88 season. And the cost, $25 million. That enabled TBS to broadcast 55 regular season games and 20 playoff games for the following 2 seasons. All right, back to our regular season action, mate. Larry Bird's 2 missed free throws with 31 seconds left in the Celtics' 105-100 loss at Sacramento added the exclamation mark to Boston's 13-game win streak coming to an end. Said Larry, and I quote, "I haven't shot free throws since practice a week ago. If you're going to be a good free throw shooter, you've got to practice."
At least he's honest.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? Bird finished with 29 points. And for the victors, Sacramento were led by Mike Woodson with 27. Boston dropped to 38 and 9. And Cleveland's World B set free the Cavs' 8-game losing streak, scoring 27 points at Richfield Coliseum in his team's 119-97 victory against Indiana. New Jersey were led by 2 great scoring performances in its victory over the visiting Pistons. Buck Williams and Otis Birdsong each notched 31 points, and the G-Man, Mike Jaminski, added 27 points and 17 rebounds as the Nets held off Detroit 130-122. Now, Michael Ray Richardson sat out this game suspended due to missing practice the day prior. The team were also awaiting drug test results on Richardson that would determine his fate, as he already had 2 strikes to his name at that time. A third would equal NBA lifetime ban, but could actually be appealed after 2 years. Detroit's leading scorer was Isaiah Thomas with 39, and Kelly Shapuka, I should add, had 37 as well. So some big-time scoring there from Zeke and Kelly. For what it's worth, mate, Buck Williams' career-high point tally is 35. Now, he had 31 in this aforementioned game. He'd score 32 or more 4 times, all during the following season. Hashtag NB87. Bit of a teaser there, mate, for the following season. At Portland, Jeff maloned the Blazers, scoring 43 points in Washington's 124-116 victory. The Bullets also had key contributions from Cliff Robinson with 26 points and 10 boards, plus Manute Bol had 5 blocks, all in the first quarter. Sweet Bells, Michael Thompson top scored for Portland with 20 points.
On February 12, Michael Jordan ignored the advice of agent David Falk, who suggested that he sit out the remainder of the season with his broken foot. Jordan had just completed a 2-day tour of second opinions in Eugene, Oregon and Cleveland, Ohio. 3 doctors, including John Hefferon, were due to hold a conference call with Bulls owner Jerry Reinsdorf on the night of February 12 to discuss Jordan's return. Chicago Bulls trainer Mark Feil believed there was no benefit to MJ sitting out the season and he needed to test the foot after over 4 months of recovery and rehab.
Plenty of happenings behind the scenes here in terms of Jordan's eventual return to the court, which I'm very excited for come the middle of March when we get up to that episode.
Jerry Reinsdorf also spoke of early negotiations with Orlando Woolridge's agent Larry Fleischer on a deal. Woolridge's camp was reportedly seeking a 4-year, $800,000 per season deal. The Bulls owner said he was confident that a deal would get done, hopefully before the end of the season.
In the lead up to that night's game, Coach Albeck, quoting the Chicago Tribune here, promised extensive work on his team's sieve-like defense for the second half of the season. So I think that was worth mentioning. Also worth noting that the Bulls signed 6'4" guard Michael Holton to the first of 2 10-day contracts on this date. He'd sign a contract for the rest of the season with the team on March the 1st, and we'll be mentioning Michael Holton and his contributions to the Bulls, which are very important during this period of time, a bit later on in this episode. That night, Chicago at Philadelphia, in front of 11,121, saw the Sixers defeat the Bulls 106-98, and the Bulls dropped to 17-35. For Chicago, George Gervin had a blinder, 30 points. Charles Oakley started to really exert himself here, 17 points and 14 rebounds. Orlando Woolridge, Gene Banks, and Kyle Macy all had 10-plus points. For Philly, Moses Malone and Mo Cheeks had 22 points. Barkley had 19 points and 13 boards, and the Good Doctor had 17 points for the 33-18 76ers.
On the day that Aaron Steen turned 8 years old, people said that the Bulls didn't have a center, and against the 76ers, they actually didn't. Going with 6'9" rookie forward Charles Oakley in the middle due to Dave Corzine's foul trouble and Juwan Oldham suffering what would be a broken jaw during the game. Oakley played very well in a virtual statistical standoff against star center Moses Malone. Kyle Macy and Mountain Allbeck both were ejected from the game, Macy in the third term and Allbeck with 17 seconds left in the game. Kyle Macy said Charles Barkley and Moses Malone had been swearing and calling Hugh Hollins every name under the sun. Then they ejected Macy, who didn't swear at him once, in questioning a travelling call on him. After the game, Charles Oakley commented on how much he loved banging inside with Moses and that it energized him and only made him more aggressive.
Not touching that one with a 40-foot barge pole. Now, this must be our episode bait for ejections and technical fouls because I have an entire posse to mention later on in this episode as well, so stay tuned for that. If you're not already hanging off the edge of your seat listening to this as we speak.
hanging off the edge of your seat / doze off.
One or the other. A good cure for insomnia, I've heard. Hashtag line by line. That day, Jordan said, and I quote, "I listened to the advice of 3 doctors I consulted, and in what is an emotional decision, I have decided the best course is not to play until I go through another examination in 4 weeks." End quote. After being down at the half, Dominic Wilkins eviscerated the Suns en route to 43 points in Atlanta's 123-114 win at Sacramento's Arco Arena. Reggie Theus had 28 points and 11 rebounds for the Kings, and Boston returned to its winning ways 107-98 at Seattle. Bird had 31 points, 15 rebounds and 11 assists in what's commonly referred to as a triple-double. And Bill Walton briefly had the upper hand versus Father Time, locking down 17 points and 10 rebounds for the 39-9 Celtics. Tom Chambers was super with 25 points and 8 rebounds for the Sonics. Some of these lines are terrible. In a nod to the date, the 13th, McDaniel was excellent with 13 points and 13 rebounds.
Michael Jordan may have been gone, but he certainly wasn't forgotten, wrote Bob Sakamoto. The Bull star was set to miss another 4 weeks and possibly the rest of the season, as it was discovered the cracked bone in his foot hadn't healed sufficiently for him to return. Comments made by Jordan at the team-only meeting the week before had certainly left their mark on his teammates. Jordan's opinion that some of the players had quit had upset the likes of Robin Banks and Sid Green.
Now, mate, I've got to re-emphasise here. Is that even a word, re-emphasise? We have our nicknames, our favourite nicknames for our players. Obviously, are all said with love and respect.
Kyle Macy actually agreed with Jordan that if some of the players' feelings are hurt by the comments, that maybe they should have a better look at their own performance.
Wow, that's pretty strong words there from Kyle Macy.
A loss to the Indiana Pacers in their upcoming game would drop the Bulls to dead last in the Eastern Conference. A change to the starting lineup was proposed by Coach Albeck, with rookie Charles Oakley likely to replace the slumping Sid Green. In the previous 7 games, Oak was averaging 16.7 points and 11.6 rebounds, including 5 per game on the offensive boards. Kyle Macy finished the article in the Trib by saying that it was times like these that you learn more about your teammates.
Yeah.
Kyle would have been a part of the all-interview team this season, I reckon, because he had no issue with speaking what was on his mind.
On that same day, Indiana at Chicago, in front of 10,346 fans, saw the Pacers defeat the Bulls 104-88. Chicago dropped to a lowly 17-36. Now, Bob Sakamoto described this game as, and I quote, the first of a 2-part battle for least in the East, and the win was Indiana's 3rd road victory in 23 tries. A few days hence, they'd be playing each other again, and that would be obviously part 2 of the battle for least in the East. Now, for Chicago, 6 Bulls shared the February 14th scoring love with double figures, led by Charles Oakley's 17 points and 13 rebounds. Indiana, Herb Williams had 39 points, which was the 2nd highest single-game score of his career, and he'd go for a career-high 40 points in March of 86. Appropriately, it should be added, on St. Patrick's Day versus the New York Knicks of all teams. We'll cover that in an upcoming episode of this series. And in other games, Larry Bird's 10-footer with 3 seconds left in overtime gave his Celtics a 120-119 win in an absolutely classic contest at Portland. He scored 47 points and also tallied 14 boards and 11 assists for his 2nd triple-double in just 2 nights. The contest was tied 22 times and had 17 lead changes, 4 of which happened in the game's final minute. Now, Jerome Kersey's layup at the buzzer rolled around the rim and fell out. Kiki Vandeweghe top scored for the Blazers with 38 points, and Boston moved to 40-9 on the season. I shared your link to this game winner just the other night. Fantastic stuff. I'm sure you've seen it before on one of the NBA highlights, but Bird was a man possessed.
What a scoreline, huh? Hashtag 3-time MVP.
This will culminate with the end of the NB86 season as well, mate. That third MVP. Spoiler alert.
Valentine's Day in 1986 was rock bottom for this Bulls team as they meekly submitted to the Indiana Pacers in front of a Chicago Stadium crowd that enjoyed the post-game Spinners concert more than the game itself.
Spinners? I wonder who the Spinners were. I suppose they've had a good crowd come in.
There's a pretty good chance that we're going to find out very shortly.
Oh, okay. My come-in Spinners went completely over your head. Keep going.
Completely missed that. Owner Jerry Reinsdorf departed the game with a minute to go, and GM Jerry Krause had a 50-minute meeting with the coaching staff immediately after the game. Mike Thibault tried a new gimmick before the game by showing Bulls highlights from the season thus far, backed by some rabble-rousing music to get them keyed for the game. Kyle Macy said that the players just sat there with no response as they watched.
Oh, my goodness. So I'm guessing as well the highlight reel would have been about 3 minutes and 12 seconds.
Pretty short. The game was close until a Pacers 27-10 run in the fourth quarter blew it open, leaving Kyle Macy to say he wouldn't mind buying a ticket to see a losing team play as long as they were busting their asses and not just giving up.
That's incredible. You've nailed it by saying he was on the all-interview team. That's fantastic stuff. I'm really glad that a player just had the presence of mind to speak up and not be afraid of what may come of these statements. So, good stuff. You mentioned the Spinners there a minute ago, mate. I think that the Bulls were reaching out to Mark Knopfler for a short-term sponsorship because they were in dire straits at this stage.
Yeah, they were definitely not brothers in arms at this point of the season.
Oh, my goodness. Milwaukee Journal had a follow-up article about MJ's injury woes, which was titled, "Injury Setback Frustrates Jordan." In it, he says, and I quote, "I think it's more frustrating now than it was in the past because the doctors kept giving me hope. I have at least 8 or 9 more years to play." End quote. Now, these quotes were taken from a news conference prior to the Bulls game against the Pacers the day prior, and I shared a photo of that said news conference recently on Twitter. At Detroit's Pontiac Silverdome, in front of a then-record NBA crowd of 44,180, the Pistons held on for a 1-point OT win versus Philadelphia. Isaiah Thomas scored 8 of his 34 points in the extra session, and with 6 seconds left, Julius Erving drove to the hoop, but was called for an offensive foul. Detroit 134 to Philly 133. Moses Malone put forward a monster effort with 36 points and 18 rebounds. Mo Cheeks had 31 points, and Charles Barkley added 23 points and 14 rebounds. The aforementioned crowd eclipsed a February 16, 1985 contest, featuring the same teams, of 43,816. Houston's Akeem Olajuwon injured his right knee, falling over teammate Robert Reed in the second quarter of the Rockets' 108-101 loss at the LA Clippers. They were 34-18 when the Dream was injured, and in the subsequent 14 games he missed, he returned March 15th versus the Clippers. More on that in an upcoming episode of this series. Houston went only 7-7.
On February 16 in the Chicago Tribune, Bob Sakamoto wrote a lengthy article on the NBA dealing with the issue of drug use amongst its players. Several prominent identities commented on the NBA's current drug policy, such as Larry Bird, who said players were hiding behind the league's previous policy. Any drug offences committed before January 1st, 1984 were disregarded under the new policy, giving all players a clean slate. Bird also said that penalties should be stiffer.
I read quite a interesting article as well, probably along the same lines in another paper around the same time as well, where it went into that grandfather type deal with the Players Association prior to, as you mentioned, January 1, 1984, and it has some great information in there, but probably too much for us to go into too many specifics, but yeah, really intriguing reading nonetheless.
Jerry Reinsdorf believes players were being rushed out of rehab facilities too fast, and teams were also being misled by the players in how soon they were ready to return. Reinsdorf wanted to see more player testing throughout the season. Bulls coach Stan Albeck said players who test positive creates an air of tension and uneasiness in a team's locker room. And Milwaukee coach Don Nelson believed that the current testing structure had broken down and that the NBPA and the NBA didn't trust each other enough to fix it.
Now, February 16th, Dallas at Chicago in front of 12,222 saw the Dallas Mavericks defeat the Bulls 120-114, and Chicago continued their decline 17-37. This game had a 1 p.m. tip-off, and in the Tribune's preview of this contest, it suggested that Mavs coach Dick Motta was playing a group of veterans at the expense of first-round draftees Detlef Schrempf, Uwe Blab, and Bill Wennington, dare I say, in Orlandos.com/one, the debut guest on this podcast. Also, this was the first in a string of 4 Bulls games in 5 days, 2 of which were away from the confines of Chicago Stadium. Chicago were led by Charles Oakley with 28 points and 15 rebounds. George Gervin had 24 points. I was going to say George Iceman had 24 points, and Dave Corzine had an incredible stat line. 19 points, 15 rebounds, 9 assists, and 5 blocks.
This is why we love him.
This is why we love him. Super stuff there from Dave. Love it. And I'm wearing my Dave Corzine t-shirt, which you very kindly sent my way, mate, so I really appreciate that. Moving on, Dallas were led by Rolando Blackman, who had 28 points, and Sam Perkins, long-arm Sam Perkins, contributed 19 points and 6 rebounds. In other games, Boston's 105-99 win at LA had plenty of feeling. Now, we chatted back and forwards about this a little bit via Facebook as well, mate, before we recorded today. The second quarter of this game was incident-filled. Off the ball, pushing and shoving, saw Jerry Seasting and Byron Scott exchanging pleasantries, and then less than a minute later, Greg Kite clobbered an unsuspecting Mike McGee, and then Kite, already high with emotion, continued to introduce himself to other Lakers, and most notably, the Magic Man himself. Did you see the footage of this where Kite was then pushing Magic Johnson for no apparent reason? You're nodding, just so the listener can tell.
Correct.
Not stopping there, in the last minute of the first half, Kite and Kareem also mixed it up, and when Kite hit the captain, Kareem's goggles dislodged. Quite the spectacle.
I was quite surprised after Kite clobbered him that Kareem didn't get up and fight back.
Well, I think he was actually stunned a bit, and the Laker players took a little while to actually remonstrate. The Celtics were 41-9 with the win, and the Lakers were 39-13 after that game. Dennis Johnson led Boston with 23 points. Bird had 22 points and... what's the word? I don't know. He had 18 rebounds.
An impressive 18 rebounds.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Wedman, Parrish, Seasting, Walton and Carlisle. No, not a law firm. Rather, Celtics contributors had 10-plus points apiece. Worthy dominated scoring for LA with 35 points, and Magic was scoreless from the field. Dennis Johnson absolutely towed him up in this game, and there was a CBS telecast. It's on YouTube. You can definitely find it. Just type in 1986 Lakers Celtics, and it'll probably come up as one of the top results.
You haven't got to worry about a 1986 NBA Finals game accidentally popping up on YouTube, Lakers and Celtics, because apparently, according to Larry, the Lakers didn't show up.
Exactly right. We did mention that in a previous episode of the series too. The San Antonio Spurs' Jeff Lamp shone brightly, scoring 16 points as the Spurs cruised to a 113-94 win over the visiting Sacramento Kings. He'd only signed a 10-day contract with the team on February 11. I must say, it was good to see Lamp switched on, lighting up the scoring column. Now, one of 7 Spurs who scored 10 or more points, and one of those 7 guys was the brother of 1979 NBA champion Gus Williams. The aptly named Ray, rest in peace, lit it up also for 10 points in the third quarter alone.
Losers of 6 straight, the Bulls had now not won a game since February 1st.
Incredible.
Back-to-back jumpers by Rolando Blackman and Brad Davis put the game away after the Bulls had pulled to within 1 late in the game. Podcast favourite Dave Corzine fell just 1 assist shy of a triple-double and also had 5 blocks in one of his finest all-round games. Stan Allback called rookie Charles Oakley the Terminator, Commando and Rambo all rolled into one as a far different player than the bench warmer that the Mavs had seen in the previous month.
Great to see Oakley asserting himself and dominating some games. And also, as we mentioned, awesome to see Dave Corzine have such a fantastic performance. Now, the follow-up to Sam Bowie's January 10 re-injured leg resulted in Bowie announcing he'd missed the remainder of the season. We're chatting about February 17 here. He'd recently returned to play, however, after 3 games, opted for bone graft surgery on his troublesome left leg and, quote, "I'm not happy with it, but I've just got to have it done," end quote. On the 17th, Chicago at Indiana. in front of 11,306 fans saw the Pacers defeat the Bulls 124-110. Chicago dropped to 17-38. It was their 7th straight loss and the most inappropriate gift the Bulls could give to Jordan on his 23rd birthday. For Chicago, George Gervin had 23 points, Dave Corzine 21 points, 6 rebounds and 5 assists, and the Oak Tree had 7 boards. For Indiana, Ron Anderson, a Chicago product, and Herb Williams had 22 points, Steve the Swinger Stepanovic had 20 points and 8 rebounds, and Vern Fleming, 16 points and 17 assists, which I think tied a then assist record for the Pacers, and friend of the podcast, Terence Stansbury, episode 58, had 12 points.
AKA the Statue of Liberty.
That's right. One of the great dunkers of all time as well. Rolando Blackman's 42 points at New Jersey steered his Mavericks to a 126-124 win. He took up the scoring slack in the absence of Mark Aguirre, who left the game in the first half with a stretched ligament in the middle finger of his left hand. Unconfirmed reports suggested he had possibly signalled a play call to Coach Motta. Albert King was awesome for the Nets with 29 points, 14 rebounds and 8 assists, and the ever-reliable G-Man, Mike Jaminski, added 28 points. Now, mate, here's a good one. Washington at LA Clippers pulled out a 96-94 win, and the Bullets' Manute Bol had 8 points, 13 rebounds and 10 blocks. His teammate, Kevin McKenna, whose second 10-day contract was set to expire the following day, nailed 5 three-pointers, which is a lot back in 1986, en route to 25 points. Following the game, when Bullets coach Gene Shue was asked when McKenna's contract would end, he replied, and I quote, "Never." I immediately headed to basketballreference.com to check McKenna's player page. His final game with the team was just over 2 months hence. In 2 minutes of action, he didn't register a statistic. Cedric Maxwell and Rory White led the LA Clippers with 17 points each, but I really love it when these previously almost unheard of players, in terms of at least us over here in Australia, have come out of nowhere and dominated, get a couple of good 10-day contracts, and all of a sudden they move on. But part of what makes the NBA great, diving back into this research about the series.
I'd never heard of Kevin McKenna before. That's a good one.
Boston at Phoenix was stunned 108-101, and that's thanks primarily to the Suns' fourth-year vet, Mike Sanders, who scored all 14 of his points in the final quarter. Boston's coach, K.C. Jones, and Larry Legend were tossed from the game. Here we go with the ejections again. Early in the fourth, after picking up their second technical fouls. Down by 17, Bill Walton put on his Superman cape and scored 14 of his 18 points to get the Celtics within 5 with just over 2 minutes left. However, Walter Davis's 20 points led 6 Phoenix scorers in double figures. DJ and Bird top scored for 41-10 Boston with 24 points each. The Atlanta Hawks lost to Seattle 100-87 in Seattle. Dominique missed the game with a sore knee, and the X-Man was ejected for fighting the second time in his rookie season. He had a worthy opponent in none other than the hulking Kevin Willis. That would have been a great one to see. And I also shared a photo of this on Twitter recently too, for what it's worth. Hashtag NB86, and you'll find it. Cliff Levingston's 16 points, future Chicago Bull Cliff Levingston, led Atlanta, whilst Gerald Henderson's 23-point, 10-assist effort led the Supersonics. And I'll mention in a few more days' time, when we recap it, that there was a couple of fines and whatnot handed out to do with that fracas.
It's a very cool photo that you shared on Twitter of the fracas. It's got the X-Man sitting on the floor with the hulking Kevin Willis and Tree Rollins breathing fair down his neck. Absolutely fantastic photo.
If you search Twitter for the hashtag NB86, you'll see all these things that we're referencing. Some great stuff, really, that just covers the history of this particular season in an easy-to-view fashion.
The Bulls had now lost 10 of 11 and 15 of their last 17. Bob Sakamoto said if you put yourself in Stan Albeck's shoes, desperation becomes the mother of invention. Albeck tried an innovative defense after Herb Williams had torched the Bulls for 39 points the previous week. They denied the Pacers the post and forced them to shoot jumpers. This and a couple of Bulls runs kept it close until a 12-2 Pacer run midway through the fourth quarter.
Now, just for a minute there where you said to put yourself in Stan Albeck's shoes, I tried, but I'm a size 14, so it was very uncomfortable. On this date, Alvin Robertson did something that had only occurred once in the NBA's storied history. He single-handedly eclipsed the visiting Phoenix Suns, recording 20 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists and 10 steals in San Antonio Spurs' 120-114 victory. He joined the Chicago Bulls' Nate Thurmond, 74-75 season, as the only player to that point to rack up a quadruple-double. Now, I read with interest that his coach, Cotton Fitzsimmons, often voiced displeasure towards Alvin. After the game, Cotton added, and I quote, "I shouldn't yell at him so much," end quote. Now, further quadruple-doubles occurred when Akeem Olajuwon did so twice, incredibly, in March 1990, and the Admiral David Robertson did so in 1994. As we record this in 2016, no player has done so since.
Which is extraordinary in itself, because that's 22 years since quadruple-double has taken place in a game. And Nate Thurmond actually had his quadruple-double in his first ever game as a Bull.
Yeah, it was the opening night in the 74-75 season, so incredible stuff too.
Welcome to the Bulls, Nate.
On the 19th, mate, Chicago at New Jersey in front of 9,292. Chicago 99 defeated the Nets 96. The 7-game losing streak came to an end. The Bulls were 18-38. For Chicago, Michael Holton, the new signee, had a great game, 18 points, 2 rebounds and 2 assists. Sidney Green had a monster, 17 points and 15 rebounds. And Dave Corzine, Gene Banks and Charles Oakley had 13 points or more. For the Nets, Mike Jaminski and Albert King had 28 points each, and Buck Williams added 16. In Philadelphia, Moses Malone and Charles Barkley scored 38 and 31 points respectively. The bread truck also dragged down 17 boards as the visiting Trailblazers of Portland dropped their 7th straight game, 153-133. Kiki Vandeweghe led Portland with 28 points, Michael Thompson had 25, and Clyde Drexler had 19 points and 12 assists. Seattle visited Detroit, losing a 118-113 decision. Isaiah and Tripucka had 23 points each for the Pistons, whilst Tom Chambers and Xavier McDaniel led the Sonics with 31 points each. Tom Chambers and Rick Mahorn were ejected for fighting in the fourth quarter, so the continued spate of ejections. There was actually a fracas back in Seattle that we mentioned earlier in the week where X-Man, Tree Rollins and Kevin Willis were fined. I believe X-Man and Willis were actually thrown from that game versus the Hawks. Now, Boston visited Golden State, taking the win, 115-100, returning to their winning ways, improving to 42-10. Bird was magnificent with 36 points, 12 rebounds and 11 assists. Joe Barry Carroll had 29 points and 9 rebounds, whilst sharpshooter Purvis Short had 25 points for the 17-40 Golden State Warriors. Now, how's this for a strange conclusion to Atlanta's visit to the Salt Lake City to take on the Utah Jazz? Adrian Dantley had 10 of his game-high 31 points in overtime as the Hawks found numerous ways to lose this one, 109-105. With 7 seconds remaining, the Hawks were hit with 3 technical fouls. First, for calling timeout with none left. Second, Doc Rivers argued a call. And last but not least, the team only having 4 eligible players left on the court.
Oh my God.
The Hawks were ravaged with injuries, missing 3 players. 5 had fouled out, and Rivers was sent backing with an ejection. Randy Whitman had 23 points for Atlanta. Apparently, the Hawks bench even projected the bat signal into the Utah night sky to see if the great Charlie Chris was within the game's confines. However, to no avail. We mentioned him in NB85. He came off the bench as the commentator for the Hawks at that stage and suited up.
And made us jump.
That's right.
As expected, the Bulls' skid was stopped in New Jersey by Michael Holton. In only his 3rd game since escaping from the CBA, Holton hit the go-ahead jumper with 45 seconds remaining to give Chicago a 98-96 lead, then backed it up with 2 great defensive plays to deny New Jersey a chance to tie the game. Holton's timing was terrific with 30 points and 6 steals in his last 2 games, as this was the day Coach Allbeck and GM Krause were meeting to decide if he got another 10-day contract. A banged-up Orlando Woolridge managed 2 points in just 8 minutes of game time.
In an upset of sorts, home team Denver held on to a 102-100 win over Boston. The Nuggets improved to 33-23, whilst Boston dropped to 42-11. Bird's 27 points and 16 rebounds were not enough as the great Fat Lever hit a clutch jumper with 26 seconds left, securing the Denver win. Fat had 16 points and 11 assists, and the Nuggets' main scoring punch came from Alex English with 31 points.
On the 21st of February, due to play the Trailblazers at home at 6 p.m. on Thursday the 20th, the Bulls found themselves stuck at Newark Airport, fogged in. The delays were that lengthy that the game was postponed until 7 p.m. on Friday, which was the following day. Some of the younger Bulls sat around George Gervin as he told stories of dropping 100 points a couple of times in Summer League.
Now, I read this article that you're referring to, however, only after I had a quick glance at your notes and inadvertently saw that you were talking about this. Some great stuff there from George Gervin. Now, I actually read the Bulls managed to fly to Indianapolis and then they planned to get a bus from there to Chicago. However, when they landed in Indianapolis, they were told of the game's postponement on that Thursday night and the subsequent rescheduling to the following night. So, Portland at Chicago in front of just 8,827. Chicago 108 defeated Portland 96, and the Bulls had a 12-point victory, improving to 19-38. With the loss, Blazers had dropped 11 of their last 12 games, so they were really struggling. Compare these headlines from each city's newspapers for the following day, mate. Chicago went with Bulls emerge from fog to streak past Blazers, and Portland went with Bulls emerge from fog to blanket Blazers. Not sure if they were sharing headlines or just a coincidence there, but
Maybe just amusing themselves.
they might have been too. They might have been. I don't have the foggiest. Gene Banks had 26 points for Chicago, Sidney Green 20, Charles Oakley had 18 points and 15 boards, Michael Holton in fine form here as a new member of the Chicago Bulls, 13 points and 8 assists, and Dave Corzine 7 points but 13 key rebounds. For Portland, Kiki Vandeweghe, another great 1980s scorer, had 24 points. Drexler, Jim Paxson and Steve Coulter had 18, 14 and 13 points respectively. The top 3 scorers in the association on this day were Dominique Wilkins, who had 38 points in Atlanta's 106-98 home win versus the Pacers. Ralph Sampson had 38 points at Dallas in Houston's 111-104 win. And Eddie Johnson, dare I say, shameless self-promotion, in Orlandos.com/41, former guest and friend of the show. He had 36 points, 20 of which were in the fourth quarter, in Sacramento's 118-110 win over his future team, the Phoenix Suns.
Just to prove that the previous win wasn't a fluke, the Bulls did it again, wrote Bob Sakamoto. As you mentioned before, they emerged from the fog to streak past the Blazers in a game in which they were stingy on defense and generous on offense. This game was originally scheduled for the previous night, but was delayed due to the heavy fog at O'Hare, which kept the Bulls in New Jersey. And Mist, you keep on with these stupid puns.
Nice work, nice work.
It was only the third time this Bulls team had won 2 straight games during this 86 season. Now, I knew that the Bulls' record going into the playoffs was one of the worst in league history to ever make the postseason, but I was never aware of the struggles that this team had in the absence of MJ.
As you mentioned, we know it was pretty bad, but to the depths that they actually dropped during this time where he was absent, absolutely incredible. And they managed to still fight their way back into the postseason. And we're getting to the really exciting part of the season as far as Bulls fans go, with the impending return of Michael Jordan, not too far away and only a couple of episodes ahead of where we're up to now, mate.
Michael Bolton Holton said, "I loved you, but I lied," and played another 33 minutes to continue his fine play, including defusing a Blazers 3-on-1 fast break attempt in the second term.
Now, mate, let's wrap things up with the player of the week. There was only one player of the week because of the All-Star break. February 16, Larry Bird of the Celtics, not surprisingly, was the player of the week with 32.3 points, 14.5 boards and 8 assists per game as the Celtics went 3-1. Now, the individual highs, Larry Bird's 47 points at Portland on the 14th of February. The top rebounders were actually Moses Malone and Charles Barkley of the Philadelphia 76ers. They had 21 boards each in the game versus Washington on the 21st of February.
I wonder how many times in NBA history that 2 guys have had 20 boards on the same team in one game.
Isn't it crazy? Like, it's an incredible stat, so it'll be good to check that one out.
Yeah.
And John Lucas, in the aforementioned game, Houston at Dallas, had 17 assists. So thank you very much on the 21st of February as well. Now, the NBA standings through February the 21st, the division leaders were Boston were league-leading 42-11 in the Atlantic. In the Central, Milwaukee Bucks were hot on their heels at 39-18. In the Midwest, Houston was 36-20. And in the Pacific, the Lakers were 40-14. Chicago were 19-38. They only went 2-4 in this period of time. The cellar dwellers in the NBA were the Golden State Warriors, almost equaling Chicago's record here at 18-40. Is there anything you'd like to add, mate, before we wrap up this episode? Thanks again for being a part of the show, mate.
Well, it's plain to see that with 47 technical fouls and 83 ejections that everyone's angry pills kicked in at the same time in this 15-day block. Giddy up!
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter at inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show. Wedman, Parish, Seasting, Walton and Carlisle. No, that's not a law firm. Not a law firm. Oh, jeez. Hashtag Corbin Burnson. I've absolutely stuffed that up. LA Law. Let me try that again. Didn't mind mixing the words. Is it mincing words or mixing words?
Mincing.
Didn't mind mincing his words. I'll just edit all that out. Don't worry about it. This will make for a good bloopers reel, let's be honest.